camera. Oh, yeah. Mm. Okay. Okay. I'm here. Camera's here, microphone's here. Jeez Louise. Ah, yeah. Hey, Ross, where are you?
We're down in Texas.
Ooh,
See my
Texas.
sister. Yeah.
I hope
Ross and Shirley, can you hear me okay?
Now we can.
Okay, we're waiting on Keenan to get online and then we're going to get started. Thanks for your patience. Appreciate it.
Okay.
thanks,
All right,
Marcus.
no worries.
Keena's in the process of joining.
Hey there, Keena's here. Apologies.
All right, thank you very much. May everybody's attention, please. Thank you, kind dais visitors. Okay, anyway. Good evening. I will now call the May 26th meeting of the Ben Lapine School Board of Directors to order. I would like to introduce our participants this evening, Vice Chair Amy Tatum, Directors Cameron Fisher, Keena Chadwick, Jenny Lynch. Is it Jenny or Jen? Okay, Jen. Okay. Um, Ross Tomlin and Shirley Olson. Superintendent Dr. Stephen Cook, Dr. Lisa Burke is our Deputy Superintendent, and Executive Assistant Marta Borberg, excuse me. Is Broberg correct? Broberg. Broberg, right. And I am Marcus Grant, Chair of the Board. Right. Will everyone please rise and show me for the Pledge of Allegiance? Broberg. Got it. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Great, thank you everyone for that. I appreciate it very much. All right. At this time, we will recess the work session and call the budget hearing to order. This hearing is for the 26-27 budget as approved by the Budget Committee on May 12th, 2026. The purpose of this hearing is to receive citizen testimony on the approved budget prior to the adoption by the Board of Directors. At this time, we will now hear for those who requested private public testimony. I don't believe we have anyone, do we? No. All right. In accordance with our GP6. Unfortunately, like I said, we don't have anyone to do this. I want to thank if anyone was intending to do so. All right. Now, final board action for the 2026-2027 board budget is to schedule take place on June 16th, 2026, regular business meeting. At this time, we will close the budget hearing and convene the regular board meeting, or the work session, excuse me. As you all know, we've been really focused on key board work and initiatives. And what we're going to be working on tonight is working with Paul Dean, our Chief Operations Officer, who's going to give us a presentation to lead us in the enrollment forecasting discussion.
All right, before we kick it off to Paul, I want to, thanks guys. Appreciate you showing up. 4 years ago, we received a report from then Portland State University that projected district enrollment. That report came out in 2021, so I guess it's 5 years ago, with a trajectory that showed that at this point in time in our enrollment, we were to be expected to be close to 20,000 students. And of course, the pandemic it was in the pandemic when Portland State produced that report for us. And as everyone has since discovered that data was not accurate. And not only was the data not accurate, it was so inaccurate that it was pretty concerning as to the methodology. And so we decided, as we were looking at how do you miss that far, what are the methods that we should be tracking so that we can get a picture of, quite frankly, even before the last bond conversation, we wanted to have better data to start making long-term decisions on. And so our operations team made a decision, and I made a decision, that we would go a different direction than the PSU report. That's what this district has used for, I think, the last 20 years as a data point. And I think the growth patterns of the community was reflected in that data. It was not in this last report. And so it became much more imperative. One of the things that I was seeking was a deeper analysis as to what type of building going on in the community would reflect an increase in student population. That was not data that had ever been provided for this district. And it's data that I had received from a demographer firm in a previous district. And so we started looking into how might we start to find a better pathway forward that's going to give us the ability to look beyond. And I say this with all due respect to the process for how we build our budget, how we do long-term enrollment forecasts, and then how we anticipate what the legislative kind of cycle of the short session and the long session do for funding for schools in Oregon. And so when you put all those factors together, the very first thing that becomes the most predictable, useful tool is enrollment forecasting. And so this was lots and lots of work was done by the firm to investigate not just enrollment patterns, but how people are using school choice in our community and how new housing developments are impacting our enrollment. Even something as obscure as any time that we did an approval of a housing development to provide them tax abatements, how that might positively or negatively or neutrally impact our enrollment. And so the report that you have in your board book tonight has a very comprehensive view on our community, on how enrollment patterns are being influencing our school capacities, influencing the number of students we have, which, as you know, as we've gone through this budget process in a very painstaking way, is truly how we make all the decisions regarding staffing and all the important things on how we're going to deliver upon this. And so what I am very excited for, and I cannot emphasize very enough, is that you're being presented with data and a presentation on how we should approach the next 10 years, what kind of conversation fiscally, but also educational outcomes, student achievement, and the things that we're going to need to do to ensure that these schools are exactly what the community wants. And it starts with deep analysis of the patterns of enrollment, the patterns of growth, the patterns of restrictions of growth, and what we need to be prepared to deal with in the next 10 years, which could include building schools and, quite frankly, could include even consolidating schools or potentially closing schools. It is a very unique time in this community, and this community has not had to deal with this in at least the immediate past. And so that data you have is important data. It's going to inform a tremendous amount of decisions. We've also kept this firm around on retainer because part of what we want to do is take another year or two and three and start to determine whether or not the data is bearing out as they saw. Much unlike the PSU, that there would be some level of accountability in this report if they missed dramatically, being able to diagnose why. And so with all of that, I want to first of all kind of frame out what I believe is one of the most influential conversations this community and this board and this administrative team needs to have right now at this moment in time so that we can step into this very well informed and ready to make really important, sometimes very hard, sometimes very challenging, but meaningful decisions for our community in the future. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Paul Dean.
All right. Good evening, everyone. We're going to be getting about chin deep in data. If you find that I've gone too high and you can't breathe, stop me, have me slow down, but we're going to be chin deep most of the time. But what I think is most important is the data tells a story, because our community is going to be looking to you and asking you questions. And I want you to be able to feel confident that you can answer those questions in a way that satisfies what their curiosity is and might go a little bit contradictory to what they're seeing out in the community, and to be able to message that in a different way. We know that under board governance that you have some really important responsibilities. The first one is academic excellence. The next one is financial planning and responsibility. And then the other one is in our facilities is capacity use and how we utilize our buildings. Those things can be in tension one another, and you may be forced in the future to make some decisions that are fiscally responsible and help produce academic excellence, but might have some facility use implications that are upsetting to people. And for you to be able to look people in the eye and say, this is a responsibility of me as a board member. I have to balance these things to help make sure that we're moving our district in the right direction. So as we go through this, I want to make sure that I'm stopping, or that you feel free to interject with questions or comments or observations, so that as we're going through this, you feel confident that if you were to go out in the community, you'd be able to speak to these things. So I'm going to begin with looking a little bit in the past, like Dr. Cook mentioned, about what we've done in the past, why we've utilized a firm to do this forecasting for us. Look at past enrollment. Then we're going to jump into the flow report that we have about what the numbers say over the next 10 years, but most importantly is why, what's driving that. And there's 4 areas that you want to be able to say is these are the reasons why we're seeing the drop in enrollment that's being projected by Flow Analytics. And then when people start to say is, well, what are you going to do about it as a board? How are we going to step in? And even if you were to do nothing, that in and of itself is an act. So we want to be able to be thoughtful and deliberate as we step into that. So with that, yes, we have been using Portland State University since 2005, and they produce reports for us. Usually those were nice, slow acceleration of enrollment. The last one that Dr. Cook mentioned in 2021, they had forecasts for this school year of a low of 17,500, a medium of 18,300, or a high of 18,800. If you think for a moment what our current enrollment is, I won't ask you to call that out, but if you think about where we were in October 1 of 2025, we were at 16,489 students. And so we could no longer rely upon that data. We needed to go elsewhere, and we needed to look at something that was going to provide us a different type of analysis. So what Flow Analytics brought to us was beyond just simply a demographic model. We wanted to look at neighborhoods, the students in each neighborhood, because each neighborhood is going to have a different pattern of residential development, and where students live is not where they go to school. And we want to understand that. We want to look at mapping attendance areas. We want to look by school forecasts, because those are buildings and they might feed with where we might want to go when we're starting to make some difficult decisions with facility usage. So that was the reason why we worked with Flow Analytics and why that we thought that this data would be richer than what we've had in the past. So our historical enrollment. These numbers represent 2015 through the school year that ended in 2020. That was the bridge year of halfway of no COVID, half COVID, okay? During that time, we saw our enrollment go from 17,354 students to 18,443. That was 6.2% growth. That was what we were accustomed to. We were building buildings, building our capacity, going into a sites and facilities process with those as our norm. And then we had the radical event of a global pandemic. During that time, one of our biggest things that we noticed is you would have bubble years. So you'd have a bubble year of a high, and this is in the orange, a high group of students come in at a larger than what was our typical enrollment. And you would see that class continue to go through the system as a school or a community that we had more students than we acknowledged. We've also had a situation where you've had a bubble year of low student enrollment. And what is important to note there is that when you turn on that water faucet of kindergartners, that's going to have a large impact on their impact all the way across the system. So after the global pandemic, we started to see these numbers. So we had this 18,443 up until this current school year of 16,489, and that's a 10%, over a 10% drop in enrollment. 2,000 students during that period of time. The first 1,000 happened the first year of the pandemic. And so we thought, and even the indications from Portland State University is that we would recover from that. That hasn't happened. We have lost students every year since. And what's important to note just as far as is that we're not alone. This was an article from the New York Times from just a few weeks ago. U.S. schools face a crisis as the number of children drops. And you can see that, particularly at the elementary, that blue chart to the right, what's happening all across the country with our elementary school students. And at the bottom, you can see the enrollment changes from 2014 to 2024 of the states that have had the largest enrollment drops during that time. And there is our state of Oregon at negative 9.4% during that time. So it's a nationwide issue, it is a local state issue, and it is a Bend the Pine drop that we're experiencing. Marcus?
Do you think some of that is, if you overlap that with job prospects or things in work?
There was an interesting article accompany that talked a little bit about some of the whys. It was dense, it was complicated. It's worth a read for sure. One of the things that you're going to see in a later slide about a decreasing childbirth rate that is happening across the country, and the question is why? And as Dr. Cook mentioned, while we're not experiencing that locally, we're still experiencing an enrollment drop, which people are going to come to you and say is, hey, if the birth rate in our area isn't dropping like it is all across the country, why is Bend the Pine experiencing an enrollment drop? I don't understand that. And those are some of the things we want to be able to arm you with as you step into those conversations with each other and the community. So I just want to pause there for a moment and see if there are any other questions or wonderings from that data. Okay. All right, so Flo, in this 54-page report, we're going to take and dissect this and break it into little chunks that hopefully will make it easier to understand and digest. We're going to use this slide as our anchor slide, and we're going to look here in the middle. We're going to start with the number of students that there were projected to decline in the next 10 years, and that's 880 students. We want to understand to the left-hand side what's driving it.
Damn it.
There's four there are four of the biggest drivers in that. We want to look at what does that mean for each of our elementary,
Oh,
middle, and high schools.
Hey, Shirley, can you mute yourself?
I'm sorry. I'm trying.
Okay.
We want to look at transfer patterns because that also has a big impact on what's happening at our individual schools. And then we want to transition to what does this mean for you as a school board and what does it mean for us as a leadership team. So let's just take a look big picture wise on these 880 students. This is what we're looking at over that time, especially you can looking at different patterns in kindergarteners, okay? And how those things happen. And then if you look, we have different experiences happening at each of our different levels. At K-5, we have an initial drop, and then it begins to recover and go back up. Middle school takes a little bit longer for that drop to really occur, and then at the very end begins to come up a little bit. And then high school, you can see that that decrease is happening all across that time. So those are what those numbers, and we're gonna look at this in a little bit greater detail. Okay. What's interesting to know is that from our peak, we're at 3,000 students less at the end of this 10-year period. What's interesting is our typical elementary school size is about 550 students. Typical middle school is 850 students, and our typical high school is 1,500 students. That's the way they're built. If you add up all of those prototypical numbers and you compare that to that 3,000-foot drop, it just gives you a sense of the magnitude of this. This is pretty stark during this period of time. Okay. This is the middle scenario. They've given us 3 different projections. So they have a low, medium, and high. The highest would mean the least amount of impact on our system, that red line. So we would see almost a flat, a slight decrease, and then actually we would end the 10-year period with more students than we have right now. The middle one is the one we're going to be spending most of our time with because they think it's the most likely. And then we have our low, which would be something that would even be more difficult, put additional financial strain on us, and have a lot more questions on what are we going to do with all of our existing buildings if those numbers tend to trend. So we're going to be looking at this. We're going to be, each of the next 3 October 1s, we're going to be utilizing the data from Flow, ask them to do the same thing that they did for us this year to find out which one of those lines are we tracking. Are we tracking on the middle, the low, and the high? And what those are, their assumptions. So Flow is making assumptions on local population growth, especially of school-age children, and the K to birth capture rates. And we're going to look at both of those things in greater detail. Yep.
When you say they're telling you the middle one is the most likely, do they give you some sort of percentages of like, okay, we're 75% certain middle is here we go, and 10% chance for the lowest? Or
they haven't divided it out into that other than middle is what they said based upon what their data they're looking at for school-age children in our area and our present kindergarten to birth capture rates. They're using those as the measure of the middle. The more we deviate from that, so if all of a sudden more people decided to move to Bend than what has currently the case, then that would change. But they're basing it on the most recent trends, so that's why they're calling the middle is the most likely.
and that's the middle for the next 10 months in their minds. We're going to stick with that for the next year, that's the most likely, and then reassess what's the most likely within annually. Is that okay?
Yes. So next, we'll get a data point that's going to be right here, right along these dots. And so that data point is going to give us an indication of, is that data point here, here, or there? And will begin to give us a little bit of a sense of that. Okay, the first one, and this I think is the one that's the biggest, and I think this is what's going to happen to you as a school board member. You're going to have someone say to you, you know what, I drive into Bend, and I see that number of people in Bend every year rising. I've seen something that lately came out in the newspaper that said, hey, we're going to get 10,000 more people in the city of Bend in the next 5 years. How can you tell me school enrollment is dropping when I see those real numbers? The highways are more crowded, and I'm seeing things that are indicating continued growth. I don't get it. Someone has to explain that to me. So that's what we're going to begin to look at. So the census are our best firm numbers that give us a sense of what's happening with our local population. So these numbers across are the people that have a Bend La Pine school address. So that is either in the city of Bend, the city of La Pine, or the unincorporated areas around, but that are located and those students are coming to our Bend schools. You can see that those numbers have grown quite considerably during each one of those 10-year census. But you may also know that that growth rate is beginning to decline. So it's not that we're not growing, we're growing at a slower rate. So that's one of the first things that I would want you to be able to understand and be able to tell. It's not that we're not growing, we're growing more slowly than we have in the past. More so, I want you to take a look at this slide for a minute. And if anyone wants to just volunteer something about this slide that jumps out at you. The zero growth, exactly. So while we're looking at our school age population is age 15 to 17, and that is slowing. So we're looking at 3.1% growth of the total community, in the last decade, 2000 to 2010. The school age children is even smaller than that. And that is our bread and butter. So you could say is, yes, more people are moving to Bend. Are the people that are moving to Bend have children? And even more so than that, are the people that are moving to Bend feeding our schools for the future? And that number is unequivocal. No, those people are not. So we're talking about net migration. We're having some people with young children under the age of 5 moving in, and we're also having people, young families, moving out of our area. So that net migration, that push says right now, and so if someone asks you, what's your biggest concern, is that young families are not moving to Bend in the same way that they were before. That's what's really important to note.
If I could qualify, I'm not sure it's exactly accurate to say young families, but families with 0 to 5 children. And one of the young children, correct. And I think it's important. There's two things I want to draw attention to that I think is really important, is the percentage of growth is down, but also recognize that the overall population is up. So the denominator of the problem is increasing. And so what we may want to find out through further analysis is, are there limiting factors that are keeping the growth from happening? And I would tell you right now, there's anecdotal evidence and at least maybe not causation, but certainly correlation that housing prices are contributing to, and housing accessibility are contributing to the problems you're seeing with younger families with younger children being able to access schools in this community.
One thing I'll add too is just that I think that as we see decline, we're also coming off a time where our normal for many, many, many years was rapid growth. So what we believe and sort of have centered on as normal is anything but for the rest of the country. And so now we see declines that are really impactful because we're coming off of a state that was really unreasonable as a comparison to the rest of the country.
Now my question is, did Flow give you any indicators that even though as more housing is being built in the areas that we had in the whole report, is that going to shift once affordability comes down? Is that going to shift again, or people don't want to move, or what is that going to look like? Did they give you any indicators on that at all?
There are some slides that will give us a little bit of a hint about that.
Okay, thank you.
No, that's all right.
I read the report like 4 times, so
No,
it's like.
please, no, it's a good segue because you're asking questions that we know that others are going to ask, and they're going to be coming in that so that you can start this conversation and someone's going to follow that up with, but what about the new housing that's about to come in? What happens if that housing is filled with these families with children aged 0 to 5? So we want to talk a little bit about that. And this is what's projected to happen, and you can see now this is about forecasts. So the forecast for 2030 and the forecast for 2040. Once again, those numbers, when you were looking at 3.2%, 3.1%, 3.9% back in the first decade of the millennium, now all of a sudden begin to slow down considerably, except for the first decade, 2020 to 2030, Lapine urban growth boundary is an outlier. It was one of the areas. Now, it's the smallest number of students, so while that is encouraging, it's just a much smaller amount of students that we're looking at is the total population. That's not students, that's the total population. And then in the next, from 2030 to 2040, they begin to now mirror what's happening in the city, in the urban growth boundary of Bend and in Deschutes County. Okay, that's the first part about large population growth that I wanted to highlight. Let me make sure. Okay. All right, we're going to be talking about kinders a lot. So again, another article in the New York Times about the plunging birth rate among unmarried women. However, regionally, they have remained relatively flat. So if you look at the blue line represents past births and then forecasts birth. So in this first column, you see the number of people that were born from 2011 to 2012. That was the incoming class of 2017 and 2018. And you see what is a bit of an aberration there. How is it that we could possibly be enrolling 100 more students than were born locally? That is net in-migration, right? That is probably the biggest lever, net migration, the difference between those moving in and those moving out. So those were that heyday, right? Where we expect, was Dr. Burke was mentioning of this explosive growth that we're all used to. That was our norm during that time. So as long as net migration is positive, we're going to always have more kindergartners than are being born in our local hospitals. Okay. Then we get to something that looks a little bit normal, where you have your kindergartners less than the number of students that are born. And we want to take a look a little bit about that and understand why is one an aberration and why is one a little bit more normal that you would see, okay? So this kindergarten to birth ratio is something that we want to talk about. Pre-COVID, we were having around 1,240 students come in as kindergartner every year. That was during that 4-year time period prior to COVID. Here are the numbers from COVID onward. 1,114. We have a little bit of a bump. Students come back into our system after the pandemic has subsided significantly at 1,139. Again, a little bit more, 1,148. And now we start to see a drop to 1,110, 1,007, and this year, 1,020. So right now, what was an original little bump after COVID has then started this downward spiral, and that is one of the biggest kickers for us. So again, it is analogous to those statistics of the ZR area, that age 0 to 5, this is a statistic that is bearing that out with less and less kindergartners. And that's that turning on that water spigot. It's the most important statistic for us as any school district is how are your kindergartners doing? So the conversion of births into enrolled kindergartens go from a 1.09, so we were having more, to the average since then at 0.9. So we want to talk a little bit about that, and people were going to ask questions. So that's a 17% drop. And some of these are, and I say hypothesized because Flow, when you read in the report, they're not attributing it to exactly one thing. They don't have the data to be able to attribute it to one thing, but they're saying it's a combination of the fact that we have this migration patterns that have changed in which young families aren't moving into the district or people are moving out of the district. I'll share one anecdote. My family, my 2 children were born at Santa Clara Hospital in California. They enrolled as kindergartners in Bend Lapine schools in 2005 and 2007. That's the net migration in. I had a colleague that I was working with a few years ago. Both of his children were born at St. Charles, and they could not afford a house in Bend, and so they moved and bought a house in Southern Oregon. Those are stories that just shine a light on a little bit that sort of supports this idea of what people were doing in the early 2000s and what some people may be doing at the present day. And there's also some data to suggest that people are looking at different schooling options, whether that's private school, online school, or homeschool. And I put down there as this future impact, there are some states that are adopting this federal program of school vouchers. Oregon has not. And then an unknown would be is if they did step into that, what would that do to some of the numbers that we're seeing today? And how would this ratio change if something like that were to occur? We don't know. I want to stop there for just any questions or observations about that. But that that kinder to birth capture rate is a really important one for us to be able to speak to a little bit.
Can you talk a little bit about what the district has done between 2019 and today to try and move that kindergarten capture rate, if anything?
Okay.
Like, do we do marketing? Have we looked at shifting the deadline, to make it more friendly to come in? Do we do recruiting? Have we, reach out to preschools? Like, what do we do?
I would say that there aren't measurable things that we could speak to since 2019 that we've attended to. This has only come to light, like the gap as to how are we identifying the difference is part of what this report identified. And so this is definitely an area that we have some interest in looking forward. The second thing I would tell you is that the 0.9 capture rate is actually still a pretty high capture rate. That is something that is of significant interest to us. And the gap, understanding the difference between what would it take to get back into above a 1.0 capture rate is of interest to all of us. And so I think that's the right question. I think it is now, instead of looking back, what did we do at 2019? Now that we've identified that the single biggest difference in enrollment is that immigration into the district from the ages of 0 to 5 is the gap that we have not captured.
We have done some specific things related to accessing our kindergarten students a little bit differently than we have in the past. We've always had sort of a loose relationship with the preschools, but that definitely has ramped up over the past few years. If you recall, in April, we always do our, the bus, I can't remember. It has been Winnie the Pooh, but it isn't now, but it's basically just going to them, right? So going to local parks to say, hey, come and register here, you get little swag bag, whatever. Because we recognize that the parks tend to be places that are very local, friendly, kind of neutral in a way that sometimes for some of our families, our schools can be intimidating for a variety of different reasons. So we've definitely amplified that. I think it's hard to tell though, actually, and so did that make a difference by what amount? You know, I mean, we have increased some of our marketing, and at the same time that we've increased our marketing, I would say that any of the alternative options for school have also just become like a reality where honestly 10 years ago they weren't even a thing. And there are some incentivizing opportunities within some of those programs that really those programs are leaning into in a way that for some families that's very attractive.
Do we have a true number on homeschool, or do we even have a number at all?
We have a number, but there's a lot of question marks around the number. So really, families are told that they need to register with the ESD. I mean, even if you just think about that statement, if you've never been in schools, like even that sentence is like, I don't know the words that you're saying to me right now. But also that assumes that they've come in to say, hey, I'm going elsewhere, and that often does not occur. So for certain families who maybe understand sort of the language of school with a little bit more fluency, we might find that those numbers are a little bit more accurate than otherwise. But there's a lot of question marks around how accurate any of those numbers are. Now, with alternative programs, many times there are stipulations within going to another program that says you have to notify the school district. And so those tend to give us a little bit tighter numbers than like a homeschooling option.
We were curious about how we stacked with capture rates with other districts. And so Flo was able to do this. So the red line is Ben Lapine, and you can see how that capture rate has changed over time. But right now, we have 2 school districts that have capture rates above ours. We have 2 other schools that are right around near where we are. And then we have 4 school districts that are quite a bit below us. So this idea that Bend is I would say, above average, but we're not at the top. And is that, the schools that are above us, is that because of net migration in? And that's why. So it's hard to attribute the cause of what it is, but that gives us a sense that we're above average when compared to, and I asked Flo, could you take other districts that we consider our comparables, like Eugene and Medford and North Clackamas, the other ones that have similar size, similar demographics. So they were agreeable to take that data and present it to us, but do it in a way that didn't necessarily call out exactly which of the districts are, but they are our comparables.
Yeah, I think I asked last time I saw this chart. There's a number of those districts, maybe 5 of them, whose capture rates are growing. And I asked, like, can we know what they are? So we can like Google it, see what they're doing that we could be doing. And I think you said that this is proprietary information.
Yeah, let me find out if there's anything more that they'd be willing to share with us on that. Okay.
Hello?
Paul, I have a
Yes.
question.
Yes.
I love all this data, but the birth rate data seems to me to be just way beyond what we could probably accept. So give me a percentage of what the birth rate data would potentially present for our district student enrollment.
I'm not sure the birth. So are you talking about, let me go back for a second. Here is the birth. These are the births that are happening locally, is this blue line right here.
Yep. But again, you know, even though this is a projection, I'm not sure that I'm confident in the birth rate. I would much rather look at kids that we have now and where they're coming from and where they're going. It just seems to me that the birth rate is something that we cannot really project.
I think I understand. I think one of the things that we asked clarification on when they were projecting birth rate, projecting not just birth rate but capture as well. Both of those were moving categories, and we wanted to know their methodology. And they were basically taking a kind of statistical analysis and not even considering factors that we could potentially influence. I mean, I'm not sure we're going to be able to influence the birth rate unless we can figure out a way to have the community incentivize more kids. But I do think that there are chances for us to influence the capture rate. The difference, and I think this is important, we're going to get into this later when we talk more about housing, but one of the areas that this board may be interested in is if we could get to just a flat rate of, let's say, 90%, 90% of the actual births, and then in immigration, capture those in that 0 to 5. Like, how do we provide access to housing? You'll see that in the housing data. Do we collectively have levers of influence? That's an area that I think this board is going to be very interested in seeing opportunities for us to engage. I think we can commit some more to marketing. I think we can commit some more to how do we tell our positive story? How do we let you know how cool it is to go to Ben Lapine schools? And then also, how do we influence those that might be considering it, having a place to live when they get here? Those are conversations that are also going to be of importance as we continue to be one of the, as you all continue to adjudicate whether or not tax abatements are happening. When people are coming to the board and saying, we want you to talk about whether or not this tax abatement should exist, you're going to see some data that is going to give you some, at least an information on what those developments might entail as regards to potential student additions or population increases.
Yeah, Steve, I understand that totally. My point is, I would rather focus on the information we have now, currently, and the birth rate information is like at least 5 years away. So I'm looking at decisions that we might need to make now or in the next year, 18 months, based on who we have now in the district. You know, which kids we have, where they are, what are they doing, are they accessing transfers. I would rather focus on the next 5 years than the birth rate, because I don't think we can actually project what that might be in 10 years.
Hey, Shirley.
That's my point.
Hey, Shirley, this is Marcus really quick. I got a question. So you're ultimately saying is, can we concentrate on where are the concentrated students in terms of density, where we're living, looking at, do we need to do school choice? Do we need to do some alternatives in terms of the students we have currently enrolled in our schools? Is that what you're looking at?
Absolutely, Marcus. I think in the next 18 months, I think we have some huge decisions to make. And although I appreciate the long range information and 10 years out, I think that we as a board have to look at what's going to happen in the next 5 years, not 20 years.
I think I have a slide, Shirley, that you're going to really, really like. So I will point it out to you when we're there, and you can let me know whether or not it is or isn't.
Okay.
Okay.
I just wanted to circle back to Jen's question. And I think, thank you, Lisa, for sharing some of the things that are happening. And I would propose that we hear at the next round some more of those types of things that are happening, because I'm a little concerned we're a couple years behind than that some districts are rolling out pretty significant marketing campaigns. And, but so I appreciate you speaking to that. But, and circling to Shirley's point as well, and I know we're going to talk about this here, but I think having something on the next revisit that could be more measurable of what are these things you're referring to. And then also on the flip side, and I know we have some ideas here that you're sharing through Flow, and just we can all kind of point to them, but maybe some anecdotal thoughts or of what might be the drivers for students to choose some of these other options outside of Ben Lapine. And we know a few, but I think that might be helpful. I know it's not easy to go there and, you know, get some of that, but I think it's worth bringing to the table in the future, sooner rather than later.
I hear the desire to, what can we control and find out what we could do about that in a positive way to impact our enrollment. Yes.
Well, and I think from my understanding is that a few years back, I think school districts used to be more connected to preschools, where the preschool teachers, I think, used to kind of like fill out a form for each of the students who would go into kinder, and that has shifted to now the first couple days of kinder. Those teachers in Ben Lapine School are now kind of like reassessing where kinders are. And I wonder if we can tap back into what used to be, so that then there is this, you know, going to the community, going to preschools, and I will find out more about that. Sure.
So you're correct. We do spend time doing assessments right out of the gate when students come in. That is not a practice that sort of has come on in exchange for no longer connecting to the preschools. We still do have connections with the preschools. The reason that we have for assessing students is that there's, I mean, I don't want to say fully that those assessments or that information that comes in is inaccurate, but it is a little bit, it lives in a space that's really different than what our school age population is working on. And so we find that many students do not go to preschool. And so we need to do that. But then also we want the information to be as accurate as possible for our current system, to accurately place students, to balance classes, et cetera. So while that assessment process has increased, that is not at the expense of having a connection with preschools. I would say our strongest connection for preschools has always been through Head Start, but we do have some level of connection with all of our preschools, and we can work to strengthen it as well.
Thank you, Lisa.
All right, we're going to move to driver number 3, which was labeled structural compression. So in essence, in a simple way, it just says is what's happening with those students at the kindergarten and elementary years eventually work their way through our system. So you can see that the middle school impact has begun and will continue, and the high school impact has not yet occurred. So this idea of our decreasing enrollment each year is because the number of kindergartners that we have and are projected to be enrolling in the future and is quite a bit short by hundreds of students by those students that are exiting the system. So that is that slow and gradual decline that's a sheer mathematical thing that is happening as those kindergartners that we showed during the last 4 or 5 years of being less than the average work their way through the system. Okay, oops. All right, let's talk about residential development. I'm going to pause on this one just to give you a chance to sort of digest what this slide is. So Flow Analytics went out, and we were very grateful that our City of Bend, City of Lapine, and our county planners fully engaged with Flow Analytics to look at developments that are underway, developments that are proposed, and developments that are in the idea phases over the next 10 years. And so when you see a yellow circle, that refers to single-family homes.
Doing okay?
Okay, and the green triangle are the townhouses, and the multifamily units are the rectangular, square, purple colored. So Director Tatum and I were talking a little bit earlier and were saying, like, why is it that Miller seems to be getting a lot more students? And one thing that you look at is, and we're going to look at this on the next page, is the difference in single-family development versus multifamily. And if you look at where those are on the west side, those developments are nearest and in the Miller Elementary area. Whereas if you draw a line down here, just a symbolic line where the boundary for High Lakes might be, you'll see there's a lack of single-family development. Also, if you notice, the lack of single-family development or the smaller amount of single-family development in the heart of the city. Why? Because you need land for that, and that land has all been built out. So as you begin to notice where is the single-family development happening, it's happening around the periphery as we expand the urban growth boundaries, and we're picking those things up. So that's what this is. This is all development that is in the works according to the City of Bend, the county, and City of La Pine. And so this is just, I thought it was just a good visual if you just want to sort of look at it a little bit and go, later on, you're going to see certain schools having an increase of enrollment and some schools with a decrease in enrollment. This helps that understanding a little bit. Okay.
It's interesting, but it doesn't overlay the prices of those houses, right?
Okay.
So the houses that are being built against the Western UGB are double what's being built in Southeast. So the chart that they gave us about student generation of housing types fails to take that into account.
So I think that's the next place we're going, okay? Good segue, thank you. All right, so the residential development, the student generation rates are different depending upon the type of housing it is, the location, East Side, West Side, Bend, Sun River, La Pine, and the grade level for those developments and what they produce. So let's talk about that observation. So interestingly, when you look at a single-family house west of 97 and a single-family house east of 97, and you look at the number of students that statistically that they generate, I don't know if anyone else was surprised by that or not. Like, as to your point, yes, the pricing is different. My logical brain expected those numbers to be more representative of what I had imagined. And so I sit there and going, my perception does not meet the reality in, I would say, a statistically significant way. Even when you're starting to look at multifamily homes on the east side actually does have a little bit of a higher student generation rate than those that are on the west side of Bend. But again, I think my gut would have been, I expected that differential to be more.
I think that because this goes back a decade, it's not taking into account what happened to housing prices here from 2019 forward. So like, this is really interesting, but I bet you if they had started at 2020 and gone to 2025, those numbers.
So I can tell you the data was generated from current students and the housing that they are in that was built from 2015 and they stopped it at 2024. So they were looking at it in that sliver.
I think that's an important distinction to make, and I think that's a meaningful factor. I think one of the things I would tell you that if you just think about these as in the blocks of green, pink, and purple, maybe?
Mhm.
Oh, you didn't
Oh, I took that
box out
slide.
the purple out
Yeah.
yet. Basically, single-family homes generate about 1 student for every 4 houses, maybe 1 per 3. Multifamily houses generate a student per 6 units. And income-restricted homes, which we have seen more of those in the last 3 or 4 years in this region than we have in the previous, like when you go all the way back to 2015. So that data set is probably more compacted into the last handful of years in a more realistic viewpoint of what housing market really is. We're seeing, and I think this is important to note, 1 student per 2 units. So when we talk about income restricted, and typically that's 60% AMI kind of restrictions, every unit that is built, every 2 units that is built, we get a student out of. And so that is your highest rate of return. And when people are standing before you, these are data points we want you to have in your back pocket when people are asking you information about these kinds of conversations.
I think it's particularly of just interesting to note also that the grade band that affects the most is that K through 5 group, right? So when you look at K through 5 in a single family home, in a multifamily home, those are all relatively the same-ish. But when you are down in income restricted, it's demonstrably different at K5, whereas when you hit 6 through 8 and 9 through 12, it starts to look a lot more like a single family home. So it doesn't seem like that type of housing is such a differentiating factor for families who have 13-year-olds or 15-year-olds, but it is a very differentiating factor for families that have kids under 11.
But included in that too, maybe most of those the housing that we've approved, or some of the housing that's being approved, is mostly what Southeast and East. So I think that's when we start looking at school shifts or changes, what that looks like, right? Because I think we say we may have to open another elementary school eventually one day, or shift something in terms of boundaries or zones or something to be able to accommodate some of those pieces. And I know that's something we'll talk about. So yeah, I get it.
And I'm not highlighting, it's not highlighted on your chart, but if you look above the pink box, the one that says condominiums, less than 1 per 20 for a condominium. We do not get students in an appreciable amount for condominium structures, which when you think about the purpose of what they're built for, isn't reflective of kind of student population, if you think that way, so.
Also of note, talking about affordability, I found it a little bit surprising that a single-family home in South County generates less students than a single-family home in West Bend. Again, I look at some of those things and I'm just like, I wouldn't have predicted that.
Well, yes, particularly if we're under the assumption that housing price is a big driver here, because this is one of the most affordable places to buy a single-family home would be South County, and yet it's not generating students for us.
And maybe is it inventory or is it those things? But when certainly that income restricted, if someone says how do you know affordability is a factor in student enrollment? If you look at this number, this would tell you, yes, it is, because income restricted housing generates more students. That's a strong indicator that affordability is a part of our conversation here.
Can you just illuminate for us what the NAs are there in North County? Which
So
schools
North
do that
County,
feed?
yes, so North County is, okay, you ready? South of the Summit High School area, okay? And north of La Pine. So it's mostly Three Rivers. And so they don't have enough data to make that statistically significant for measurability, so that's why they put that in there. Okay. Anybody want me to linger here any longer? Okay. Okay. All right. So a good summation for number 4 is, while residential housing and growth brings students into our district, it is not bringing them in at a strong enough rate to overcome the other 3 factors that are decreasing enrollment. It's the one of the 4 that is bumping up our numbers. It's just not doing it in a way that is greater than all of the other things that are pulling the numbers down. So it's not a negative, it's a positive, it just isn't strong enough.
Yeah, I want to just linger there just for 1 minute because we've been sitting with these data for several months now, and I cannot overstate how impactful this idea of how rapid and consistent Ben's growth is impacting this. Because I think you could look at this and be like, oh, kind of stop the bleed type of thing for Ben Lapine schools. That's not what is happening. What is happening is that we're coming into like a more typical situation that is seen in many places across the country, probably more typical for an established community. And then we have the overlay of what all schools across the country are experiencing. So more options, that type of thing. But it hits us in a different way because it is coming off of something that was so unusual for so long that became our norm.
One of the things that we also discussed as a group that have played around with this data a little bit was, what is the impact of 1,000 houses within a half mile of a school? And when you start running the numbers and you just immediately say, well, 3 out of every 4 homes built won't have a student in them, number one, so that puts you down to 250 homes. And then you spread 250 homes that have students in them across K through 12. And all of a sudden, it isn't the mathematic. I had the assumption that we were going to be so busting at the seams at Caldera High School for so long. When you start projecting those numbers, and we haven't even gotten to the effect of choice, parent and student choice, on these numbers across the system as well. But immediately, when 3/4 of your houses do not entail students living in them, it takes a different kind of mathematical problem. And so all of a sudden, 250 houses of those 1,000 are providing students for Ben Lapine schools, and those students are spread K through 12. Now you have a different conversation. And then add to that 27% of any of those families are going to choice out of their chosen neighborhood school or their home neighborhood school into a different choice, and all of a sudden you spread that growth out over many different locations.
We're going to look at the impact for the next 10 years projected for our schools. And so this shows all of our elementary schools, including our charter schools, where we currently are enrolled at the 25-26 school year, and what we can imagine according to these projections. Again, this is the middle. I just want to remind you, remember, this is the middle of the 3 scenarios that we have. And your eyes, like mine, might be drawn to what are the biggies, right? So this is what's projected, where we're going to have students, less number students enrolled at some schools. And then we're going to see this explosion, particularly at Silver Rail, which again invites us to saying, well, how do we solve that problem? We solve that problem through changing the boundaries. And so when we look at this, we have to say okay, when is this going to be happening? And we need to engage with our community on a boundary process to address that, and probably address other things that we're looking at as saying there are other ways that we need to be thinking about redrawing our boundaries. Okay.
Is it possible to see a table like that that compares to capacity?
A wonderful question. With that, we have engaged with Flow to do a capacity analysis report for us that will do that very thing.
And then we're all tracking, Redmond is doing this They did it last month and they're gonna do it again this week, I think. Yes, because they have 3 elementary schools that are projected at 130% of capacity and they're in a boundary changing conversation and, yeah, okay. So we all are tracking that there's a roadmap of doing this right now.
Yes, we've
Yeah.
done
And
that.
we've done it
Yes.
since I've been on the board.
Totally,
Yes.
totally.
Yes.
Just that it can't, doesn't have to be we'll get to it in a few years. Like
No.
this can be a thing we could work on. Okay,
Yes.
great.
Yes.
What year was Silver Rail built when they did the rebound thing with Bear Creek?
2016, I think.
Yeah, the boundary changes
So just-
happened the 2019, 2020, because it was when Dean started kindergarten. That was when we
This is-
shifted. That was when
North
the last
Star.
boundary change was that affected Silver Rail.
I'm, okay.
2019 was because of North Star, we ended up doing boundaries, and then the following year, we did middle and high school boundaries, because that's when Caldera was opening, so we did them in a 2-staged approach.
Right. Okay, thanks.
Quick look at middle schools. You'll see that that impact that we saw, talk about structural compression, where it impacts our middle schools, really begins to show. Although they are all pretty much in the negative, except for Three Rivers. You can see what some of the schools, and again, you're now getting to a geographical region in our area where they're more impacted than others.
As a reminder, they're built for around 800 students.
Okay. And high school. And I didn't highlight any of those. They were all worth a highlight. So certainly when people see these numbers, they're going to be asking us, what are you going to do, right? Boundaries, marketing, and capacity analysis, right? To inform tough decisions. Okay. All right, I want to talk a little bit about the impact. And I think hopefully Director Olson is still with us. I think this next slide is going to be one in which I believe she was most interested. So I want to take a moment to just digest this. This is a tough one. It took me a little bit to really create a frame of reference. I think it's easiest if we just look at a school. So I'm going to use the first school on this list, Bear Creek. So what this horizontal yellow line says is where neighborhood students actually go to school. So this is our current students. So at Bear Creek, we have 209 students who live in the Bear Creek neighborhood, okay, attendance area. Of those 290, 190 go to Bear Creek. If you're curious where the rest of them go, if you continue to look across that, you'll find out where those students actually go to school. So you're looking at, for Bear Creek, you could either look at this as a capture rate. They are capturing 65% of the students that live in their neighborhood go there, or you could look at it as the other. 34.5% of the students at Bear Creek transfer out and go to a different school, and we can see where they go. So keeping it with Bear Creek, let's look at it vertically. The blue vertical box reflects the students at a particular school and where they actually live. So if only 109 students from Bear Creek go to Bear Creek, and we have 484 students at Bear Creek, where do the rest of them come from? And that's, if you look vertically, you can see, and I thought it was good to highlight Bear Creek because they have a program, right? A program that attracts students. So because they have DI, dual immersion, you're going to get probably a more diverse group of students choosing to go there so that they can take advantage of that program. So I just want to linger here as well. So you can see that they have a pretty high transfer in rate, as you would expect at a school that has a unique program. Director Olson, is this something that, like, when you were saying, is I want to look at our current students about where they go, is this something that you were looking for?
Absolutely, Paul.
Okay.
Because I think down the road, we are gonna have to deal with not only attendance areas, but transfers. So, by program. So, this data is really important. But, I'm not gonna jump to my next shot with, which is what I think as a board we need to consider. So just thank you for the data because it's really important.
Okay. We have the same slide for middle school and the same slide for high school that I will go to, but I don't want to jump there too quickly until people have had a chance to just sort of look at this and wonder necessarily, or if anyone wants to make a comment or ask a question. I just want to make sure that I'm giving ample time.
My question is, what is going on with Innsworth? It's almost like a 40, like more people go out than they actually are there. Yeah, 212 students are in the count, but only 94 students actually go to Innsworth themselves. Is it because families work outside those things, or is it like what are some of the other factors that are? Because I'm looking at where most of their school kids are ending up are at Juniper, or they're ending up at Juniper, and what's the other heavy one? You had to go into the Bend International School or to the High Desert Montessori. Is where most of their kids seem like they're transferring to.
Yeah, I think for each family, there's a different reason, right? But Innsworth is a unique spot because it is a very small community. It's a very small group of students. And so there are positive things about that, and there are also challenging things about that. So I think that some people may choose to leave based on things that they've heard or whatever, some sort of narrative about like which students maybe go to Innsworth.
Okay.
Sometimes I would say largely those things are, it's hard to say that any sort of statement about any group of students is like, you know, ubiquitously true. I think that there's a lot of people who live in that area that may choose to have their children go to different spaces based on different work needs. The other thing that is consistent with this school is that it is a walking school. So there are no buses that come in. So it keeps it very isolated and insular. So if that's something that you're looking for, that's a great spot to live and have your student attend. If you are interested in more programming, more options, things that come with like a little bit of a bigger school, you might choose to do something different. And so I think also there is a factor that when families start to opt out of something, like they go somewhere else, it doesn't really matter where, but somewhere else, then there becomes a narrative that goes along with that of like, oh, this is what you do. So when newer people come into the area, it's like, oh, my child goes elsewhere. And so then there's maybe something that follows that. So it's hard to actually pinpoint anything specific, but I do think that that is something that has been noticeable for a few years that's acute to this community.
Well, I'm looking at the Highland Magnet School, and I'm looking at the Montessori, and I'm looking at mostly in those areas. Well, those two, the most, is where it seems like most of our kids are transferring into, especially the Highland Magnet School piece. Think about it, you have 115 students coming in just from High Lakes.
That's one of the things I wanted to draw attention to is
Yeah,
that
just from High Lakes.
what you see in these last 5, I think it starts with Ben Lapine Online, and from there to the right in the design, you're seeing magnet school enrollment. And what you're seeing in those enrollment numbers are where are the choices being made. And some of these, if you look, for example, like look at Amity. Amity has a total of roughly 141 kids total enrollment. Those kids are coming from all over the district. And then when you look at other magnet schools, you're seeing a heavier concentration of students coming out of schools that might demonstrate, for example, a network of informal communication that exists at certain other schools about why they may want to be transferring into Highland, for example. I think Marcus called that out, that, for example, 115 current families that live in the High Lakes zone are choicing into Highland, and 61 of the William E. Miller School live in the William E. Miller Elementary School zone are choicing into the magnet choice of Highland. And so that's the power of this document, is that it shows patterns, it shows a percentage rate of both capture and choicing out, and you can start to diagnose some very important things when it comes to decisions that we're going to have to make as an administrative team, and that the governance of the board would be expected to lean in on.
So we're just going to cut to it then. This talk about the elephant in the room that I know Shirley's alluding to as well. Is choice a problem?
Choice is a set of problems that come with choice that, if you take away choice, creates another set of problems. And so I think that's a values conversation. I think if you take that question and answer it in 100% isolation, you're going to have an issue in which you talk about what choice are you, like we haven't gotten there yet, but we use choice at the high school level to help balance enrollment so that we maintain a balanced kind of approach with at least our high schools that are in Bend metro area, so that it's who's getting the choice to make the decision, right? When you, I don't know, I don't want to speak for parents, but I would tell you it's been my experience that when you take away parents' choices, they're going to have a feeling or a particular response to that, if that makes sense.
It can be a challenge in kind of some basic ways. So if you take a look down the left side, you'll notice all of their schools that have an attendance area. This does not include everybody.
Right, I know.
So Amity's not on there, Highland is not on there, Westside Village is not on there. These are schools that do not have attendance areas. So just by virtue of them existing, you could argue that they are taking from an existing attendance area. And so when that happens, there are things, to Steve's point, that come with that, right? You have less staff, you have less whatever, less opportunities when that situation is not full. Now, if you're choicing into very full options, or students are choosing to leave their attendance area, which is overflowing, to go to a choice, that's brilliant. That's great, right? You're starting to sort of level things out. But we have several of these schools, or a handful of these schools, without attendance areas. We do have preference areas related to them. And so that's why you see there are certain areas or certain attendance zones from which many of these students come. So like for Highland, they otherwise would go to High Lakes.
So my hypothetical is basically, if this is my hypothetical, I'm not saying this is what we're going to do, but this is my hypothetical. If you make the reason people are choosing to go to other schools, if it's an option at their area or that they would normally go to school, would that reduce some of the enrollment pieces that we're talking about, or shift some of those different things? I know it's a thing to think about, but it's just something I was thinking about when I was looking at the data.
Shirley, I think your mic is still on.
Yep.
To answer your question, Marcus, I think those are kind of 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. Like if you're taking from, and I hesitate to say taking, because that sort of implies that it's like I don't know, that each school is a threat to the other. Like that's not what's going on here. But if you are having 2 schools, one of which is an option within a boundary of a neighborhood school, there's competing factors in there, right? So they're competing for the same students. So it's not that different than whether it's outside, whether it's inside. I think the one factor is that then families who choose to go into that option don't have to probably rely on transportation, which is a major factor related to any type of school choice, even as our transportation department has tried to advance opportunities to access.
I want to give our virtual directors an opportunity to comment or ask a question. Okay, okay,
Hi,
go ahead.
Paul. This data is absolutely informational, but I do think we need to have a kind of a conversation about what are we looking at? Are we looking at 5 years? Are we looking at 10 years? Are we looking at what we could do or what we might do? I just believe that it's going to take another year for us to absolutely understand all this data and think about what is both financially and reasonably acceptable for our kids. We all know that changing boundaries is a huge issue. Closing schools is a huge issue. But I think that we absolutely need to spend some time in the next year to look at this forecast and develop some plans for how we are going to address student enrollment decline and school boundaries. It's not a fun it's not a fun decision, but I'm feeling that this is going to be a huge project for us in the next year.
Thank you.
One thing
Director
I also think
Chadwick?
one thing I also think about, I'm not sure if someone had mentioned, I think it was Dr. Burke who mentioned transportation. And I am curious about, leveraging our public transportation. I don't know what those numbers look like, and Bend continues to grow, and right, in many urban schools, students use their bus pass, right, to take public transportation to school. I don't know if, anyways, that is something that that comes to mind. And I think one other thing that has kind of been coming to mind too, as we are up against these, um, these kind of different stances, or as we navigate different solutions or decisions that are hard ones. Um, I'm curious, like, when do we also say, do we are all we're committed to equity within Bend the Pine schools, and I'm curious about, like, when we start kind of shifting maybe even more, um, of like, okay, well, do we have exceptional programs, um, or are we going to kind of even out the playing field, if you will? Um, so like, I think, yeah, to Director Olson's point, I think I would like to kind of almost carve out some sort of guidance in terms of, like, okay, well, what is the criteria that we're looking at when we approach these different types of questions? Because it seems to me that that more of these harder questions are coming our way than they have previously. And I was just looking at our map, um, the map of Bend itself, and like, where's central this our central library? Our central library is way southeast, right? And what does that mean for the urban growth boundary on the east side of Bend? And how is that going to impact our schools that already exist today? So I can see how this just keeps growing and growing. Um, yeah, and I would like to potentially, you know, consider some sort of guidelines or um, just to like rein it in, I think, a little bit. Otherwise, it just becomes a massive conversation. And curious too, what is the city's plan in terms of housing around the east side of Bend, southeast side of Bend? Um, Director Tomlin?
No, I was waiting for you to finish, Keena. So, Paul, just a quick question. And there are caps on the choice options, right? I mean, there's only so many students that can transfer out to certain locations. How does that work?
Yeah, so it works in different ways for different areas. So for the magnets, we have very specific like lottery numbers, right? When we're talking about a choice option, that's a little bit different. So schools that are choice option would be like the Juniper program. So these are programs that somebody could say, hey, I'm interested in. There is a cap, but what we have done less over time and now have over the past 3 years, we have engaged in this practice is that for certain, if you are trying to access an ACR or leaving an area that where your school is already far under enrolled, you will not likely be considered. So it's not just sort of like if you put your name in the hat, there you go, and that's all it is. Each school has a very different type of methodology. For example, Bear Creek, it has both an attendance area and it has a preference area that spans 3 schools. And there's a preference area related to, or a preference option related to balancing the number of native English speakers with native Spanish speakers. And it has sibling opportunities that come before it. So like the layers of each school are very unique. So it's hard to answer your question to just say this is the one way. But it is true that some students would not be able to attend something because it is full. And it is also true that there are some students who would not be able to leave their area because it is under enrolled.
But we could make some small adjustments by controlling the amount of cap at each location, potentially, right? If that's one way we could help alleviate some of these issues.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And cycling back to Director Lynch's question from earlier, the next level of reporting that we've accessed is this common defined capacity of each school, each neighborhood school, so that you can see, and capacity is not like, if we all defined it, we would have 7 or 8 different definitions of what capacity is. And so part of what we're seeking in the next step is what does it look like when a school is full and how much is that enrollment for an elementary school? What percentage of full is a school? And when you do that math, you're going to get some level of neighborhood schools having a percentage of this, and you're going to get magnet schools of having 100% full because they're opening until the lottery is open until they're full. And so there is most certainly an equity conversation that isn't just about boundaries. It's about what choices and options are we going to establish so that people recognize. I mean, you saw like that example, just the number of families that are coming out of one of our elementary schools to access a magnet school. And we just got lots and lots of emails from families who are disappointed in decisions that were made about how that school was staffed. That's a perfect example of how choice and options are being used in this district as a tool for balancing that also come with other side effects. And so this is an important conversation for us to all have.
All right, I really, really appreciate the engagement. We're going to look at the middle school. We're almost done with at least the data-heavy part, but I foresee some desire at least to chat about some other topics that this invites. So the middle school capture rates, you can see the average is 78%. There is some differences amongst the middle schools. They're pretty much similar, and one that's a little bit different than the rest. Okay.
It's interesting because it's almost the opposite of what you see in elementary. It's the one middle school with a bespoke program that is demonstrating a capture rate that's below.
Yep. And let's move to high school. Yep. Okay. High school, huh? Okay. The high school is averaging around 75% capture rate or 25% transfer out rate. Okay. And these are in the appendix of your report, so feel free at any point in time you want to go back and do a I wonder. They're certainly there for you to be able to do that, but I didn't want to go too much further and finish the presentation portion, at least until you understood what those, I think, somewhat complicated charts look like. Okay. So this is the last thing we're going to do before we just sort of summarize. But this was in response to Dr. Cook's wondering, and what happens when we have a 100 multifamily residential development and it fully opens and people look at that going, oh my gosh, they're all going to X school. And so let's use the math. And so when you have something up, so this is just a scenario, 100 unit non-income restricted development in the Jewel, High Desert Middle School, Caldera area. What might happen, again, statistically, if that was to occur? So in order to do that, you have to get the capture rate of a multifamily on the east side of Bend, and you see that the numbers are different for K5, 6-8, and 9-12. You then have to use the capture rate of each one of those individual schools. And then it's just a math problem. And when you do the math, that 100 unit might produce 6 students at Jewel, and if you were to have them divided evenly, that would be 1 per grade. So it just sort of like, it's the aha, like, oh my gosh, it's good. Maybe not as much as I thought. It would produce 2 students at High Desert and 3 students at Caldera, if the mathematics were absolutely. But I just think that frames it up, and it's good to have that picture because it allows us to connect the dots when we're looking at the residential development and knowing what we know about what it does for student generation rates and what it does with our open transfer policies, what it might mean for those students is this. And then you can multiply this any way, shape, or form you want to in other parts of the city where something was to open up and going, I wonder, you get someone on the phone, this is going to absolutely inundate X. This helps, it puts it in perspective.
And I also just want to remind you that the capture rates of low-income housing really is substantially higher than the rest of these. And so it really is a factor that should be in your mind in some regard.
No.
Yes, Director Olson?
I'm still on camera. Thank you.
I think Steve's wearing a mask.
Director Olson, did you have a comment or a question? Okay. Okay, in summary, I've got 2 slides. What does this forecast mean to the board? And what does it mean for the district? And I think a lot of the comments that I've already heard today, you're going to see captured here. One is,
Okay,
you've got
great.
financial stewardship. We've got, this has implications for staffing and budgeting. It will beg the question of, what do we do or not do with future capital bonds or operational levies? When we, as Director Lynch had mentioned, capacity. So if we get a school-by-school capacity and you look at how they're utilized, we have to ask the question, is there something that we could do boundary-wise that would allow more academic programs to not be spread across schools, but to concentrate them, because it allows students to have greater access than if they're in an under-enrolled school than they currently do. And so, and if we have a facility that we're paying heating costs and all of those other costs for, and we could redo boundaries and have those students shift somewhere else, is that the financially responsible thing to do? So those are questions to ask. Attendance areas, you've all brought up about program access and choice. It invites that question. Boundaries, we're going to have to look at boundaries and see what this means. And we've talked about regional coordination, housing growth, what type of housing is really important, at least from our perspective. And when property tax exemptions, do we treat them all the same? Do we treat them differently? Because certain are going to be for populations of families that might access our schools, and others may be for populations that are not accessing. And so do we look at them differently? And I'm just going to summarize is that these trends will require the board to provide clear direction regarding how the district prioritizes resources, utilizes facilities, and serves students over the next decade. I think the work that you will be leading will probably be more significant than anything other than hiring a superintendent. That your mark in helping us figure out what are both the immediate, what do we need to do in the next year, 2 or 3? What do we need to do in the next 5 to 7 years, and what do we need to do in the next 10 years? But even if our numbers were completely flat with enrollment, we're still right now are 2,000 students less. And so even if we had flat enrollment, not decreased enrollment, it would still force us to ask these questions and come up with what are our values and what's important to us, and then give direction to us saying, this is some of the work that we want you to do. So I don't know if Dr. Cook or Dr. Burke want to tag along onto that.
We're excited to have that conversation with you, and we're very excited to also make recommendations on each of these things as we go into the future. So looking forward to this conversation, looking forward to really challenging discussions and a future that is going to be in service of this community, that we have those conversations often.
My questions are relatable to facilities in the sense of how do we utilize community organizations that work hand in hand, who are in partnerships with us? How do we look at possibly using some of our facilities to be able to house some of those, to be able to bring in different revenue streams? Is that an option? Is there any options in terms of reduce our choice from 25% right now at the high school level to maybe a 15 or 10% choice? And looking at some of those things, how do we shift some of those things? Those are the questions for me. In terms of the levy piece, let's look at some of the most affluent areas in our state who basically are the larger districts who have these levies. What are they doing well, and what did they do to be able to do that? I'm not saying we have to do another field study, but at least get some understanding. Director Fisher and I were sitting here having a conversation about looking at some of the different schools in our community, especially some of the private schools. The San Francis's, the Cascade Academies, the different ones. What are they doing to attract different people? The Baker schools, what are they doing in terms of trying to capture people to be able to come? So there's so many different things I know we got to talk about in terms of looking at that. We're looking at the age in terms of which some of the Summit area is aging out in terms of being able to enroll in schools. And I think that's the least of our enrollment in terms of our high schools. So there's so many things I want to choose, but I want to know questions to those things I just mentioned. Even what Director Chadwick mentioned about public transportation. What does that look like? Working with the city to be able to even have more hubs to even make that functional. Because with Hawthorne only being the only functional transfer facility, it's going to be tough to be able to do that. And I know there are plans in the works of building more of those. I've already talked to the city about that. But my thing is, though, we gotta have a large conversation to have. And I know those are the things that are popping up in my mind in terms of some of the things we can look and shift and change.
Yeah, and not entirely pertinent to this, but one of my questions is always when students and families are choosing to leave schools and leave our district and go to these alternatives, getting more data on why they're making those choices so that we can hopefully attract them back. And I think we have talked before, I don't think I'm misrepresenting data, that we see drop points, like middle school. Kids transfer out from middle school, they transfer out at points of elementary, but then a lot of them come back in high school. So if students are transferring out at these catch points, why is that? And what can we do to impact them not choosing an alternative?
I think we can definitely look into that and should. I think what we see most prominently is the opposite, which is just that they haven't ever come in. Like that kindergarten group who chooses to not come in, they come in at like an 8th or a 9th or something like that. We don't see a lot of drops once they have been part of our group. So, it's interesting. Director Lynch had sent us something from Iowa Public Schools at one point, and one of their methodologies that they use to capture kindergartners is to stand up preschool. And so if there was not, access to preschool is pretty challenging. And if you are the game in town with preschool, once you have them, the likelihood that they stay there is pretty high. We don't see a lot of people who are just full-scale dissatisfied. Now, that happens. I don't want to pretend that that's not a thing, but that's not a big trend. Once they are here, they're with us. It's getting them here out of the gate, and that's where we see this challenge.
One of the things that we've done as a toe in the water marketing employee, let me just start by saying educators are not known for their marketing as a general rule, right? Like this is public school districts are at an all-time low perception right now. And there is just a standing need right now for us to call out and have people hear us when we call out. And so one of the things we did was just almost as a proof of concept was we ran some ads. Maybe perhaps if you watch Central Oregon Daily News, one of our ads that we ran was this ad for bus drivers. We ran that for about the last 2 months. And the rate of return on that ad was phenomenal. And so this idea of how do we find and market, which remember, we don't even have a marketing director as a school district. How do we take advantage of an opportunity in a community as such to find ways to connect to people who might be thinking about other choices? And that is something we're focused on. Like, what would that look like for us? And how do we step into that with the kind of, when you do the math and you look at each of our schools, like we don't have it yet, but I can tell you it's coming. That grid that shows how many students we have in each of our schools and how many available seats, that tells a story. And so this idea of how do we fill those seats with students, that happens most likely, as Dr. Burke just shared, if we can get them in, we hold on to them pretty darn well. And so how do we make sure we get them in a way that, and then keep them engaged in that? But that marketing ploy, we have 2 other places that might be able to show us impact, and that's at 6th grade, and that's also as freshmen.
I also
And- No, just the last thing I want to say to that is the data bears that out. We have 1,000 kindergartners. Those 1,000 kindergartners, by the time they're in 5th grade, tend to be up to 1,200. By the time they're in middle school, they go up even higher. By the time they're in high school, they're 1,300 to 1,400. And that data is, that is not just capturing some of the people that are making choices for homeschool or whatever, but also some of those families that are immigrating into our community. And that's that's real data we need to be able to predict and track as best we can.
The data, these grade progression ratios shows that as long as you're at above 1.0, means that you have students coming in that year more than they were there the prior year. So that's the data. So sometimes we get stories, right? We have, you're a school board member. Someone comes and tells you a story because you represent the school district. And what sometimes we do is a story becomes our story, or I think in the most worrisome ways, it becomes the district story. Whereas a story is that. It's a person's experience. So someone may have left Ben Lapine from 3rd to 4th grade. But what we want to be able to do is to ground ourselves in data. While that might be true, and you have heard it from 2 or 3 parents who all left that school at 3rd grade, in order for us to protect ourselves from leaping to the conclusion about that is a mass exodus of students from 3rd to 4th grade, we go back to the data and saying, while that is true at the individual story level, it is not true at the data level to that degree. So just is that balancing of those things is making sure that a story doesn't become the story. And so having this data to look to and go back to and have someone engage with you and you go, great, thank you for sharing that. Let me tell you a little bit more about what we've learned from the research that's been done for Ben Lapine schools. It's that both and that we're able to do with our community that I think is helpful.
I think that's
To that effect, like, this is obviously we've had conversations here in sensitizing the key drivers summary. And I'm curious if there will also be a next step of an abbreviated version to share with our constituents that is easily digestible so they can understand what is happening for our schools here in Ben Lapine.
Yeah, let's go to the next one. Yeah, there it is.
The answer is yes. We have not gotten that far yet. We've released the report. It's 50-some pages, so it's not easily digestible. I will tell you that we wanted to have this conversation. I will also tell you I've got an op-ed sitting in my back pocket right now that is ready to go out into the community. I think once I get it kind of last set of eyes on it, I think it's ready to go. And I think I don't know of an easy way to engage in this conversation. I think we have to hit it repeatedly, and I think we have to do a much better job of actually dialoguing about what are the factors that are in our control, and how do we communicate this, and how do we also step into, people do make choices about homeschool. People do make choices about that. How do we engage them in a way that lets them know we're pretty cool if they wanted to come to school with us and we want them here? How do we create that environment as well? And so this is going to be a shifting of mentality for this community and for this district. Before the last 2 decades, it was just build schools as fast as you possibly could so you could get everybody a seat at the table. Now we've got all these schools. Some of them are going to have empty chairs in them. What are we doing next? And what's the long-term stability that we're going to present for our community as to how we do not waste these resources, and how do we create an environment that is competitive and compelling, and making sure our community is aware of that?
Yeah, I think, as we go into and have fiscal constraints everywhere we look, and we need to tell our story more, those things are, from a monetary standpoint, in conflict, right? And so I think it's really important that not only our board, but also our staff, to Steve's point, where we don't tend to be marketers of our craft, that we are telling stories in our community of the cool things that are happening literally every day. I think that educators, as much as anybody else, tend to, they might find themselves talking of like the wacky story that occurred, like the get a load of this type of story. and it doesn't necessarily paint the more balanced picture of what is the majority of things that are so positive and so unable to be replicated in any other space but our schools, but it doesn't get the play. So this sensational story or the one-off story, to Paul's point, starts to get a little bit more of our story, and we have to impact that in a big way. So I think we can all, both at this table as well as just in our schools, tell that story of education and what that looks like now. The amount of conversations I've had with members of the public that their only reference for school is their experience in school. So the amount of times that people have said, well, schools need to do more of the trades. Like, that's a very common conversation that I will find myself having with people. And when we talk about, oh, well, we do that. We do that too. We have all kinds of different opportunities. They're shocked by that, and they haven't heard that. So that's us telling our story in a way that is really more real to what our day-to-day is.
So we do have, like you, we have some homework. So we're going to be comparing our October 1 enrollment numbers with Flow. So they're going to be giving us this data on an updated, regular fashion. We're going to be beginning the sites and facilities process. And so we're going to have to do evaluation of our existing land holdings, which we were holding, to build more schools. If we're not going to build more schools, we need to ask the question of what's necessary, what's surplus, what's the most the best thing for us to do with that. We need to look at city and county growth patterns. We have to do capacity analysis. We have to look at potential school consolidations. We have to address budget impacts. We need to realign staff to changing scenarios. We transferred a lot of teachers this year. We're going to have to continue to look at how, well, that's probably what our future is until we get to a point where we are maximizing our capacities the way that our facilities the way they need to. And then I think you have all spoken. We have to identify opportunities to improve our student capture rates and our enrollment retention, the students that are with us. So yes, and I think we all wrote notes of other things that you were asking us to look into or keep in mind during this process. That's all that I have, but I want to make sure, however, Chair LeGrand would like to either bring us back or anyone else, but that's my portion.
I figure Dr. Chris would say something. I know Shirley has to say something as well.
Paul. Come, Marcus. Paul.
Yes, please.
This data is so important, but what I am projecting is that in the next even 2 years, we need to evaluate this data by school, by grade level, and make some really difficult decisions. So I am so pleased that this data is so responsive to where we are. And I honestly think the board is going to have to make some big decisions. We're talking about another 2,000 kids of negative enrollment. And that has a huge impact on where we are. So, Paul, I would really love to hear some recommendations about what we look at significantly. I'm not that concerned about birth rates, but I am very concerned about the enrollment projections. So, can we anticipate some hearty recommendations from you about what we need to consider?
Of course, we'd be glad to. I want to add, today we did virtual staff meetings, which we do those now quarterly, I think. The second question I was asked was whether or not we are doing exit interviews with families who choose to separate from Benlow Pines schools
Yeah.
to
Mhm.
determine whether or not there is a
Yeah.
core reason for declining enrollment. And the answer to the question was that there's actually two questions being asked there. And the first question was, do we do exit interviews? And the answer is yes, we do them. Do we determine, and we do them with varying levels of fidelity and varying levels of feedback on that. Those happen at the school level. That's question number one. The second question was that the presumption or the assumption that declining enrollment is happening almost invariably due to dissatisfaction with Benlow Pines schools. It is not accurate. That is not the accurate assumption. And I explained that in the presentation today with the virtual staff meeting. The key takeaway that I want to make sure that our community is recognizing is that it is a changing set of community conditions. We have declining enrollment because we are graduating 1,350 students starting in 8 days. And we are bringing in 1,007 kindergartners. Like, that is the math. And now could we get that 1,007 kindergartners up to 1,150? Maybe we could with a marketing campaign. Maybe we could start to pull some people back from homeschool. Who knows? All those different pieces, we're going to do those. But the idea that the district is causing people to leave 300 or 400 students at a time from each grade level, and that's where we've lost these students, is honestly, I think, more prevalent, believe it or not, than any of us would want to believe. And so having the accurate information, getting out there and starting to have that dialogue with our community, I think is imperative from this point forward.
And so I think ultimately what we're saying is this, and you're correct. I picked up a few things when I was at NSBA and I was at the last conference on that. And the one thing I noticed that a lot of districts are doing is they are creating a student profile, or almost like a district profile, for what is a plus district look like, or A plus student profile look like. In terms of looking at from a marketing standpoint, how do we basically start looking at it from that standpoint? If we are trying to tailor make what we want our families and our schools to be able to say, it's okay. And like Dr. Burke mentioned, most of the marketing is it's okay to toot your own horn and tell everyone what you're doing well, but at the same time to continue to make sure those things are amplified. The CTE needs to be at the top, those different pieces too. And I think those are things in terms of marketing and understanding those pieces, I think is going to be beneficial to us as we shift. But the one thing I want us to get away from too is, like you said it too, Dr. Cook, is the narrative is that public education is flawed right now. And that's the narrative that they're doing a great marketing job. And that's why they're trying to get vouchers everywhere, because they're trying to do certain things. Their marketing to get more vouchers out is their ploy. We just have to counteract that and say, you know what, we have to look at what is beneficial to our community, our specific concerns. And I think that's going to be the essential piece of building what that profile looks like. And I think I have all the data. I brought the information back for me as well, so I can give that to y'all too. Because there's a great district in Wisconsin is doing something similar. They knew they were losing enrollment. They knew they were doing something. They marketed them schools as a different perspective to be able to start getting their enrollment back up. So I'll get all that stuff to y'all as well. Directors, while I have y'all attention and everyone, do y'all have any more questions for Paul or Dr. Cook or Dr. Burke before we adjourn today? All right. Again, thank you for this comprehensive information. Like Shirley said, she doesn't care about birth rate. But the one thing I want to say is anytime you say flow, I have this small inclination to say kiss my grits, but I'm not going to do that. I just age myself by saying that. And then know why you get it, right? And a lot of people may get it as well. And Dr. Burke's like, what is he talking about? Anyway, Alice. All right. So our next regular school board meeting is scheduled for June 16th. Would that be